How the Incas built highways through the jungle 600 years ago. Imagine receiving a fresh fish from the Pacific Ocean while living at 13,000 feet above sea level in the frozen Andes Mountains. Not in days, not in weeks, in less than 24 hours. That was not magic. That was engineering. That was the power of a civilization that, without wheels, without horses, and without any machinery whatsoever, built the largest road network the pre-Columbian world had ever seen. More than 25,000 miles of pathways cutting through deserts, climbing snow-capped peaks, and plunging deep into one of the most impenetrable jungles on the planet. In the 15th century, while Europe was still stumbling along mud-soaked dirt roads, the Incas were already operating the most sophisticated transportation and communication system in the entire Western Hemisphere. What makes this even more staggering is that they pulled it off across some of the most hostile and varied terrain a human being can cross, from the bone-dry Pacific coast over Andean peaks exceeding 20,000 feet, all the way to the edge of the Amazon. This is the story of the Capacnan, the royal road of the Incas. An engineering achievement that still defies easy explanation today. The name Capacnan comes from Quechua. Capac means noble, royal, principal. Nan means road or path. Together they form the idea of the royal road, the backbone of an entire empire. The capital was Cusco, known by the Incas themselves as the navel of the world. And it was from Cusco that this immense road system radiated outward in 4 cardinal directions, following the political division of the territory into 4 suyus, the 4 great regions that made up the Tawantinsuyu, the proper name of the Inca Empire. To the north, the Chinchaysuyu. To the south, the Colasuyu. To the west, the Contisuyu. And to the east, pushing into the jungle, the Antisuyu. Each of these axes carried the main road toward regions with completely different climates, peoples, and resources. And each stretch was built differently, adapted to local terrain with a degree of engineering intelligence that continues to leave researchers speechless. In the frozen mountains, the Incas laid flat stones meticulously fitted together without mortar, holding firm against the weight of snowstorms and earthquakes. In marshy lowlands, they built artificial raised causeways of earth and stone to keep the road above the waterline. Along the desert coast, roads were flanked by low walls that stopped sand dunes from swallowing the path. On steep slopes, they carved massive stairways directly into the rock, with steps wide enough for a full caravan of llamas to pass without breaking stride. But it is in the jungle where the story becomes truly extraordinary. The Antisuyu was the region of the unknown for many Andean peoples. That direction pointed toward the hot, humid world below the mountains, where the forest was dense, diseases were lethal, and indigenous tribes did not always submit to Inca authority. It was a genuine frontier, both physical and symbolic. And even so, the engineers of the Tawantinsuyu found their way through it. The roads in the jungle and in the transition zone, known as the Cheja de Selva, the eyebrow of the jungle, where the Andes drop steeply down toward the Amazon basin, were the hardest to build and the hardest to maintain. The humid heat would rot any wood quickly. Constant rainfall caused landslides and erosion. Vegetation grew relentlessly over any abandoned structure. To deal with this, Inca engineers developed sophisticated drainage systems. Stone channels ran along the sides of the roads, directing water away from the surface. Retaining walls held back slopes prone to collapse. Where fast-moving rivers blocked the way, they built bridges. And what bridges? The Inca suspension bridges were structures that stunned the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century. Woven from natural plant fibers, particularly ichu grass from the high Andes, these bridges could stretch more than 160 feet across deep gorges and churning rivers. The most famous of them, the Queshuachaca Bridge over the Apurimac River, is still rebuilt every year by local communities using the exact same ancestral techniques. A tradition more than 500 years old that pulls the past directly into the present. There was even an official government position called Chaka Suyuyuk, whose sole responsibility was inspecting the empire's bridges. That single fact tells us something fundamental about how the Incas understood their road network. It was not merely infrastructure, it was a living organism that needed constant care, permanent maintenance, and people dedicated exclusively to keeping every stretch in working order. And who sustained that maintenance system? The answer lies in one of the most important concepts in Inca social organization: the mita. The mita was a form of taxation based on labor, not goods. Every adult in the empire owed the Inca state a set number of days of service per year. Building and maintaining roads was one of the primary ways of fulfilling that obligation. Local communities looked after the stretches near them as part of their responsibility to the state. It was a system that distributed the effort across the entire territory without needing armies of workers brought in from distant lands. And mobility was, in fact, the key to everything. The Incas had no wheel. They had no horses. The only pack animal was the llama, which could carry roughly 90 pounds. And yet they moved armies of tens of thousands of men, redistributed food between regions, collected tribute, and responded to crises in a matter of days. How? The answer is one of the most ingenious communication systems humanity has ever devised: the Chasqui. The Chasqui were specially trained runners, selected from childhood for their physical ability, their endurance at altitude, and their capacity to memorize messages with absolute precision. They did not run long distances alone. They operated on a relay system. Every mile and a half or so, there was a small station called a Chasquiwasi, the house of the Chasqui. Inside, 2 or 3 runners always waited, rested and ready to receive the message and take off at full speed. When a Chasqui approached, he announced his arrival by blowing a pututu, a trumpet made from a conch shell. The waiting runner rushed out to meet him, received the oral message or the quipu, a knotted cord device that encoded information, and was already moving before the incoming runner had fully stopped. In this way, messages traveled continuously, day and night, at speeds that left the Spanish utterly astonished. The distance from Cusco to Quito, more than 1,200 miles across brutally difficult terrain, could be covered in less than a week. Chronicles from the period record that fresh fish from the Pacific coast arrived alive at the Sapa Incas table in the mountains. A logistics operation that would rival modern distribution networks. The speed and efficiency of the Chasqui made any false or intercepted message a crime punishable by death. Absolute loyalty was required. The service ran 24 hours a day, every day, including through the night, when torches were lit along the road to guide runners through the darkness. In extreme emergencies, a system of signal fires along mountain ridges could transmit an alert even faster than the Chasqui themselves could run. Along the main highways, every 12 to 18 miles, stood the tambos, larger structures that served as supply posts, warehouses, and lodging. They were genuine logistical centers where troops could rest, where food and equipment were stockpiled for redistribution, and where imperial officials found accommodation during inspection journeys. The archaeologist John Hyslop, one of the greatest scholars of the Inca road system in the 20th century, mapped hundreds of these tambos along the Chapacnan and concluded that no official traveler would ever be more than a full day's walk from a support station. In sections crossing arid zones, the Incas went even further. They built water channels along the sides of roads so that travelers would have access to drinking water along the entire route. In some desert stretches, they even planted fruit trees to provide shade and food during the long crossings. The road was not simply a means of transportation. It was a fully integrated service, infrastructure in the deepest possible sense of the word. What is even more remarkable is that all of this was built without any conventional form of writing. The Incas had no alphabet, All logistical planning, coordination of construction, and management of populations was accomplished through quipus and a strict administrative hierarchy that allowed the Inca state to function with an efficiency that baffled every European observer of the era. And we cannot talk about the Capacnan without talking about its most iconic stretch, the one that leads to Machu Picchu. That citadel built in the clouds, at the edge of the Antisuyu where the Andes meet the jungle, was one of countless jewels strung along this road. The Inca Trail that tourists walk today is just a fragment of a few dozen miles from a system that stretched across 6 modern nations. But even that fragment is enough to raise the hair on your arms. Walking it, you can feel the polished stones beneath your feet. See retaining walls that have held for more than 500 years, and imagine the ceaseless flow of life that once moved through there. Armies, merchants, runners, priests, imperial officials, loaded llamas. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 16th century, they were completely overwhelmed by what they found. Pedro Chiesa de Leon, a Spanish chronicler who traveled through Inca territory in the years following the conquest, wrote about the grandeur of the roads with undisguised admiration. He compared the Capacnan to the great roads of the Roman Empire, recognizing in it the same ambition and the same capacity to unite a vast territory under a single centralized power. But the arrival of the Spanish also meant the beginning of the end for the Capacnan. The indigenous population, which provided through the Mita all the labor to maintain the roads, collapsed catastrophically. In less than 50 years after the conquest, more than 12 million people were reduced to roughly 1,100,000, wiped out by European disease, warfare, and enslavement. Without people to maintain the roads, and without the Inca redistribution system that gave the entire network its purpose, the Capacnan began to fall apart. Spanish horses and carts were not suited to roads designed for human feet and llama hooves. Ancient paving stones were ripped up and used to build churches and colonial buildings. The jungle, patient and relentless, reclaimed what belonged to it. Stretch by stretch, the Antisuyu disappeared beneath meters of vegetation, and there it stayed for centuries. Today, the Capacnan is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized in 2014 as one of the most extraordinary legacies in human history. Researchers from 6 countries, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, Chile, and Argentina, worked together to map, preserve, and study the sections still intact. And in the communities along the route, ancient traditions remain alive. In the Cusco region, 4 communities gather every year to rebuild the Quesuachaca Bridge, using the exact same techniques their ancestors used 500 years ago, with the same hand-woven fibers, the same precise knots, the same organic engineering that has defied and continues to defy the centuries. Perhaps the deepest legacy of the Capacnan is not technical. It is what the road reveals about an entire way of thinking about space, territory, and community. For the Incas, the road did not simply connect places. It connected peoples, resources, cultures, and visions of the world. It was the thread that held the fabric of the Tawantinsuyu together. And when that thread was cut by the conquest, it was not only an empire that fell, it was an entire way of inhabiting the world. Walking today along the preserved stretches of the Capacnan, whether across frozen high plains or where the jungle presses against the ancient stones and tree roots curl around history itself, it is impossible not to feel the weight of what the Incas built. 25,000 miles of road, no wheels, no horses, built with hands, calculations, determination, and an understanding of nature that took centuries for modern science to even begin to comprehend. They did not simply cut highways through the jungle. They opened a window into a world that, in many ways, we still have not fully understood.